It's estimated about 6 million feral pigs are roaming America, causing an estimated $1.5 billion in damages.
A wildlife crew in Blanco County, Texas, pulled the card from a trail camera after a routine night of hog surveying, sat down to review it, and stopped talking. Not because of the pigs. They had logged more hog footage than they could count. The silence came from the far edge of the frame, out past the animals they had come to cull. Something out there was moving with a patience that did not belong to a scavenger. Something that looked, the longer they watched, like it was working from a plan. And when they grasped what they were seeing, not one person in that room had seen it coming. To feel why a few seconds of grainy video could shake people who do this professionally, you have to understand how badly their side has been losing, because most Americans have never once heard the real figures. For 3 decades and more, feral hogs have been chewing through Texas in what amounts to the biggest land mammal invasion in modern American history, and the whole time the country has shrugged it off as a nuisance, a pest, a budget line. The scale says otherwise. The USDA puts the national feral hog population at somewhere around 6.9 million animals, and roughly 2.6 million of those live in Texas by itself, better than a third of the entire country crammed into one state. And they are not penned into some far corner you could fence off. Out of the 254 counties in Texas, breeding hog populations have taken hold in 253 of them. A single holdout, El Paso, way out in the western desert where the ground runs dry and open enough to keep them at bay, is the only one still clear. 1 county in 254. That is not an infestation you contain. That is a map that has already been rewritten, and the animal doing the rewriting drains money like a wound. Texas alone bleeds an estimated $500 million a year to hog damage. And stacked up nationally, the bill runs near $3 billion annually, a figure that keeps climbing no matter what gets thrown at it. So when that Blanco County crew sat down to a routine survey card, they were grunts in a war their side has been losing for a very long time. Which is exactly why what flickered at the edge of that footage hit so hard. It was the first thing in years that looked like the ground might be shifting, and it came from a direction nobody had thought to watch. Before the footage, you need to understand the enemy, because a feral hog is not simply a pig that strayed off a farm. It is something stranger, an animal that got stitched together over 5 centuries entirely by mistake into a near-perfect invader. It begins in the 1500s, when Spanish expeditions landed along the Gulf Coast hauling a food supply that carried itself. Domestic pigs herded along on the hoof, meat that walked to the next campsite on its own legs. It was, for the time, a genuinely clever way to feed an army on the move. You don't haul your rations, you drive them, and they arrive fresh. When those columns broke up or failed or simply wandered on, a share of the pigs slipped off into the trees and nobody bothered chasing them, because they were food and food was everywhere, so what was one lost pig? Those stray animals melted into the forests of the American South and stumbled straight into paradise. No predator big enough to threaten them, no rival worth the name. No winter cruel enough to thin the herd, just deep cover and easy crops as far as a snout could travel. And to a pig, paradise reduces to one thing above all others: breeding, litter after litter, in the dark, unchecked for generation upon generation, until nobody in authority thought of these animals as a curiosity anymore. By the time anyone in power looked up and took notice, the descendants of those first Spanish hogs were not visitors. They were woven into the country as permanently as the oaks and the limestone, a fixture that had been quietly compounding for centuries, while everyone assumed it was just part of the scenery. Then came the second blunder, and this one was on purpose. In the early 1900s, well-off Europeans chasing big game excitement started shipping in Eurasian wild boar, tusked and bristled and heavy through the shoulders, animals honed across thousands of years to outlast Russian winters and wolf packs, and turned them loose inside fenced hunting preserves. And fences give way. Storms flatten them. Floods rip out long runs of wire. Somebody leaves a gate swinging. The boar got loose, and out in the wild they met the feral pigs already roaming the south, and the two lines interbred. The boar contributed the armor, the aggression, the survival instinct, the ability to learn. The domestic pig contributed relentless fertility, adaptability, and a a stomach that will take almost anything. What came out was a hybrid tougher than the barnyard pig, sharper than the wild boar, and more ruinous than either parent alone. An invader nobody engineered and nobody can unengineer. That is what Texas is up against. Not an escaped pig, an animal that got forged in the wild specifically to beat us. And to see why it wins, you have to face the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic is the beating heart of this whole thing, and it is genuinely frightening. One feral sow can throw 2 litters in a single year, and a litter can run as high as a dozen piglets. Carry that math out across a whole population and the numbers quit acting like a wildlife stat and start acting like a chain reaction. Turn your back entirely, and a feral hog population can double in under 5 months. 5 months. That is not a breeding season, that is a reset switch getting slammed over and over, every cycle, on land, with nothing built into it to push back. Every other creature out there answers to some limit, a predator, a sickness, a hunger ceiling, a hard winter. For 500 years, the feral hog answered to none of them. It had open range, bottomless food, and a birth rate so vicious you could wipe out 70% of a local population in one hard season and watch it climb all the way back before the next. Hunters have a name for that. They call it a vacuum. Pull animals out and the survivor's breeding capacity simply floods into the empty space you just made. You are not bailing out a pond, you are throwing punches at water. That is why officials quietly stopped calling this a problem, because a problem has a solution and an ending, and this had neither. The biologists who had studied it longest went looking for a darker word, and the one they landed on was occupation. And once that word is in your head, it will not leave, because the animal fits it. A feral hog can hit 30 miles an hour flat out, faster than you and faster than most dogs sent after it. It can top a 40-inch fence, and the boar in its blood gave it a slab of cartilage and scar tissue over the shoulders that can thicken to a full inch. Armor the hunters call the shield, hard enough to stop a blade and sometimes solid enough to blunt a bullet that lands wrong. This is not livestock that wandered off the back 40. This is an armored animal that outruns you, clears your fences, and shrugs off the tools you bring to end it. But the muscle and the armor are not what unnerve the people who work these animals. It is the mind. And on that point, one voice keeps surfacing. One USTA biologist, Dr. Sarah Vance, has put years into tracking how these hogs answer pressure, and what she reports is not the terror of a cornered prey animal. It is something colder and more calculated. Her warning is that when you take a shot and miss, when the gun goes off and the hog runs off untouched, you have not merely blown a chance to kill it, you have trained it. From that moment, the animal ties a particular smell, a particular place, a particular method to death, and it does not forget. Vance has tracked hogs that refuse to come back to a kill site or a bait station for a solid year after one bad night. A single missed shot can shut down a hunting ground for 12 months. Think about what that does to a control effort. In most hunting, a miss is just a wasted shot, you try again tomorrow. Here, a miss actively makes the problem harder because the animal you failed to kill just got smarter and taught the rest of the group to avoid the exact spot and method you were counting on. Every failure compounds against you. Her summary of it has been repeated in enough field meetings that it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a sentence handed down. You don't hunt these animals, she says, they study you. And an animal that studies its hunters, remembers what it learns, and passes that knowledge to its young is not a pest in any ordinary sense. It is closer to an adversary, one that gets more capable every time you fail to finish it, which is exactly why brute force kept losing. Sit with that, because it flips the whole war around. Most invasive species stories are about volume and force. This one is about a creature keeping notes on the people trying to kill it, cataloging their tools and their timing and their habits, then handing that file down to its young. And while it studies you, it takes the country apart in ways that sound made up until the invoices land. Hogs have plowed manicured golf greens into cratered mud overnight, turning a course into something that looks shelled. They have gnawed through buried fiber optic line and knocked out communications because the conduit happened to run where a sow felt like digging. In one case, a whole sounder wandered onto a live military runway and shut down flights because nobody could promise a jet wouldn't hit a 200-pound animal on the tarmac. They honor no fence line, no infrastructure, nothing people build, and it goes well past property. In 2019, a woman in Harris County, Texas, lost her life to feral hogs in the early morning hours outside the house where she worked. A grim event that dragged a hard fact into the daylight where nobody could keep ignoring it. This is an animal that, under the wrong circumstances, can kill a person, and once you absorb that, the whole thing stops reading like a story about crop damage and starts reading like something closer to a standoff. And the crop damage is staggering on its own. A farmer in Williamson County has gone to bed with a healthy field and woken to $40,000 in losses. A single crop churned into mud and shredded stalk in a few dark hours by a herd that arrived, fed, tore up the ground, and melted away before sunrise. Multiply that one field across a whole state season after season, and you begin to see how the annual bill climbs into the hundreds of millions without anyone quite being able to stop it. So Texas answered the way people answer when they are losing. It hit harder, and for decades the approach was identical everywhere, and it failed. And seeing why it failed is the key to why the footage mattered at all. The old method was crude and simple. Trap them, shoot them, run the survivors off your land and onto the neighbors. Picture a rancher, call him Norman, standing in for the dozens of men who have fought this on their own ground. Norman ran all of it. Corral traps baited with soured corn and rigged to slam a gate on an entire group at once. Trained catch dogs to bay and pin a hog until the shooters got there. Hired hands, money he didn't have to spend. And for a stretch of weeks it would seem to work. The fields going still, the rooting stopping. Then it would come back, because all he had actually done was shove the survivors next door. And the ones that returned came back smarter. Wise to his traps, wise to his dogs, wise to him. A researcher who studied control programs across the region put it about as flatly as a scientist ever does. He wrote that the tools we have are simply not strong enough to win this. Not that we need better ones or more money. We do not have tools strong enough. And that was the end of the sentence. And here is the part people avoided saying for a long time. The harder the push, the worse it got. Because force did not shrink the problem. Force scattered it. Look at the helicopter. On paper, the heaviest weapon there is. A good team can rake 400,000 acres of brush in a few days. Gunners dropping hogs in the open while the pilot drives the herd. It is quick, it is cinematic, and it racks up a body count that reads like a win on a spreadsheet. And it never once bent the underlying math. Because when a helicopter roars in low over a group, it kills the ones caught in the clear, the slow and the unlucky, while the rest explode outward in every direction at 30 miles an hour into the densest cover they can reach. And they keep going long after the rotors fade. Some run miles, some run clean off the place, over the county line, into country that had no hog trouble the day before, and there, spent and displaced and breeding, they seed something new. The most aggressive removal was quietly planting fresh populations in clean ground. Every helicopter run that scattered survivors was laying down the next infestation a county away. Think about what that means. The single most powerful, most expensive, most dramatic tool in the arsenal was not just failing to solve the problem, it was actively spreading it, carrying the invasion into ground that had been clean the day before. It was the exact opposite of what everyone believed they were doing. Not containment at all. Dispersal with a body count stapled to it, and pricey too. One helicopter run costing around $20,000 for a few hours, while the USDA fed over $100 million into hog control across roughly a decade, and watched the population estimates climb anyway. That is the definition of money lit on fire. Spending a fortune to make your own problem worse, and doing it for years because the body count on the spreadsheet looked like progress. If a war this lopsided grabs you, hit subscribe before the next part, because this is where something no one had accounted for started showing up in the brush. Around 2014, something began cropping up in the hill country that fit none of the models, and it started at the nests. Feral sows build farrowing nests, shallow, scooped-out bowls lined with grass and brush where the piglets ride out their most defenseless early days. Researchers checking those nests during population surveys started coming across them empty. Not deserted. Emptied, dug open, ripped apart, the piglets simply not there. And here is what froze them. No blood, no sign of a fight, No churned earth, no drag marks, nothing. The nests had been taken clean, fast, silent, precise, and whatever did it had left almost nothing to read. A wildlife biologist named Michael Bowden crouched over the tracks stamped into the dirt around one of those hollowed-out nests. And what he saw refused to add up. He didn't bag the sample first. He didn't start a write-up. He got his director on the phone because he wanted another set of ears on it before he put it in writing. The prints were coyote, and that should be flat impossible. A coyote is a 30-pound animal. A feral sow guarding a nest is 200 pounds of muscle wrapped in inch-thick armored hide, carrying tusks that can lay a hunting dog open from chest to flank, with a temper that never yields. Every manual, every textbook, every grizzled old-timer would tell you a coyote does not take that on. A coyote is a scavenger by trade. It takes what comes cheap, the carcass on the shoulder of the road, the leftover afterbirth, whatever is already sick or already dead. It does not stroll up to an enraged armored sow and empty her nest. It was the wrong suspect entirely, the equivalent of lifting a house cat's paw print off a slaughtered steer. And yet there they were, coyote tracks circling in, closing, drifting back out, and dead center a hollowed nest. The piglets vanished, and nowhere a single spot of blood. One anomaly, one county, unexplained by any model. The kind of thing that gets a note in the margin and then gets forgotten. But it was the loose thread. And once researchers pulled, the whole shape of this war unraveled and reassembled into something no one had been looking for. Because to really know what was happening out in that brush, you can't read it off the ground. You have to see it. And in Blanco County, on an infrared trail camera planted for a plain old eradication survey, somebody finally did. The clip is grainy, drenched in the pale green and white wash of thermal night vision. A group of hogs out in the open, rooting, the big sow drifted off to one side, the piglets bunched near the nest line. And along the edge of the frame, where the brush hands off to open ground, there is movement. Not the jittery snatch and run of a scavenger grabbing scraps. Something slower, purposeful, something that the more of it you watch reads less like an animal eating and more like an animal executing. This is the point where the room fell silent, and here is the thing nobody predicted. The thing that put a chill in the biologists. It was not the kill, it was the teamwork. Watch the front animal. It slides in low, belly nearly grazing the grass, ears pinned, and it does not come at her head on. It loops wide, testing the wind, and settles downwind of the sow, where its scent can never reach her. That is not raw instinct lunging at food. That is a tactician picking an angle, and it is not working alone. Two more shapes split off into the dark along either side, sliding into position the way a wolf pack pincers a herd, the way a squad clears a building. They hold until the lead moves. They wait. For long minutes, nothing happens at all. The coyotes sit tight, the sow roots and grunts and stamps, 200 pounds of armor and short temper, with no idea she is already boxed in. And then she does the very thing a mother is wired to do. She wanders a few yards off to feed, just far enough that a gap opens at the nest. That gap is the whole thing they have been waiting on. The flankers don't chase her. They don't need to. The lead is already through it. It's over in under 5 seconds, one clean sprint to the nest. One bite to the back of a piglet's neck, and gone. No standing to fight, no lingering to feed, no sound at all. Hit and vanish. By the time the sow's head snaps up, by the time it registers that anything is wrong, the piglet is in the tree line and the coyotes have melted back into the brush as if they were never there. No brawl, no trail of blood. No contest the sow ever had a chance to win, because a contest never took place, just an opening and a hunter who had mastered the art of finding it. So that was the answer to the empty nests. That was the answer to the missing signs of a fight. The thing nobody had funded, nobody had planned for, nobody had even thought possible, had been doing this in the dark for years. And when researchers finally went digging in earnest, the proof was already sitting in lab freezers, waiting on somebody to ask the right question. At a military installation in Texas, biologists examined the stomach contents of 18 coyotes and turned up fresh piglet remains, killed not scavenged, in nearly 1 out of every 3. Freshly hunted. Clear across the country in Georgia, analysis of coyote droppings found piglet DNA in north of a third of the samples. 2 separate states, 2 separate populations, 1 identical behavior. This was no one-county fluke. It was systematic, it crossed state lines, and it was generational, passed from one coyote to the next, sharpened and handed down. Predation that had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. And here is what makes it so ruthlessly clever. Every control effort people ever mounted aimed at the same thing: the grown animals, the huge, cunning, armor-plated adults that dodge helicopters. The coyotes ignored the grown animals completely. They struck at the young. Scientists put a term to it: high-risk micropredation. Stir up confusion at the nest, take the litter, and never for a second engage the beast that could split you open. They were not waging the war the humans were waging. They were waging the one war that actually beats a runaway breeder. The war on its numbers themselves. Hit what it produces, not the producer. And a few packs took it further still, timing their strikes for first light to catch sows drained by a full night of feeding and nursing. Behavior learned, behavior taught, adapting in real time. That is the reveal nobody saw coming. Not a bigger gun or a smarter trap, but a native animal everyone had dismissed as a garbage eater, quietly running the single most effective anti-hog operation on the continent, for free, in the dark. While the people burned $100 million swinging at the wrong end of the problem. Now stay with this, because here comes the gut punch, the part that makes the reveal more than a nature show curiosity. While that natural correction was gathering force in the brush, working for nothing, asking for nothing, we were paying money to wipe it out. From roughly 2017 through 2020, southern states were writing bounties as high as $75 a head for coyotes. Coyote numbers duly dropped, and in a single Texas county that thinned its coyotes by about 60%, the hogs multiplied threefold in the span of 3 years. Tripled. We were paying to kill the cure. Let that settle. We spent north of $100 million federal dollars, flew helicopters over 400,000 acres, engineered smarter traps, and at the very same moment cut bounties to destroy the one animal that had been quietly winning the fight on our behalf. You could not design a more self-defeating plan on purpose. We looked straight at the predator solving our problem and saw one more pest to exterminate. That is finally starting to shift, and the shift is the hopeful thread in all of this. There are smart traps now, wired with infrared and remote-triggered gates that drop on a whole group at once and leave no survivors behind to learn the lesson. Texas is trialing hog-specific toxic feeders built to spare everything else. And in some places, for the first time, coyote populations are being shielded instead of bountied, not out of sentiment, but as strategy. One oosteobiologist summed the shift up neatly, saying the coyotes were never a bonus on top of the plan. They were the plan itself. It is a real reversal. A wildlife agency staring at an animal it spent decades destroying and realizing it should have been protecting it all along. And that only happened because somebody finally sat down and watched the footage instead of just counting carcasses. Before the honest reckoning at the end, it is worth pausing on just how smart the coyote strategy actually is. Because once you see it clearly, the decades of human failure start to make a painful kind of sense. Think about the problem the way an engineer would. The feral hog is an exponential breeder, and the one unbreakable rule of an exponential breeder is that the population lives or dies by how many young survive to breed themselves. Kill adults and you barely touch that, because the survivors just breed the losses back. That is the vacuum. That is punching water. But interrupt the young, the piglets in the nest, and you are cutting the exponent itself. You are not subtracting from the population, you are dividing its future. That is precisely the pressure point every human program missed. Because every human program went where the drama was. The big armored adults, the helicopter runs, the trophy-sized boars. We attacked the part of the animal that was hardest to kill and least important to the math. The coyotes, running on nothing but instinct and learned behavior, went straight for the part that was easiest to kill and most important to the math. They never had to win a fight with a 200-pound sow. They only had to open a 5-second gap and take what was in the nest. It is the difference between trying to bail a flooding river and quietly damming the spring that feeds it. And because the behavior is learned and taught, it does not stay in one pack or one county. It spreads the way any successful hunting technique spreads through a predator population, pup-watching adult, generation refining generation, until whole regions of coyotes are running a strategy that no biologist designed and no budget funded. That is what makes it so unnerving and so hopeful at once. Nobody is in charge of it. It is just working, quietly on its own, in exactly the place our own efforts never reached. But here is the hard truth, and it deserves your honesty, because this is where I level with you rather than sell you a clean ending. It is not enough. Not yet. There are still somewhere around 6.9 million feral hogs in this country, about 2.6 million of them in Texas, spread across 253 of 254 counties. A single sow can still throw 2 litters in a year, and a whole population can still double inside 5 months. No lone coyote pack, however sharp, outhunts numbers like that by itself. By the raw numbers, the hogs are still winning, and anyone telling you a few coyote packs turned the war around is handing you a fairy tale. What has genuinely changed is smaller and more honest than a victory. For the first time in decades, it reads like a war and not a one-way slaughter. For the first time, something native and overlooked is pushing back hard enough to bend the line a little. So the real question is no longer whether we win outright. It is whether nature can adapt quickly enough to count, whether that learned, taught. Dawn raiding behavior spreads through coyote country faster than the hogs can breed, and whether we can keep from repeating our own worst mistake and deciding all over again that the predator is the enemy. That last part is what keeps the biologists awake, because we have already shown we will do exactly that. We bountied the coyotes once while they were saving us, and nothing stops us from doing it again the second a rancher loses a few calves and demands action. The footage out of Blanco County did not hand anyone a tidy ending. What it handed over was a glimpse, one clear look at a war being fought in the dark by an ally we never enlisted and nearly erased, and a reason, for the first time in a long while, to think the brush might not be as defenseless as everyone feared. The thing nobody saw coming wasn't a monster. It was help, and we almost killed it before we understood what it was. So be honest with me in the comments. If the whole program landed in your lap tomorrow, would you bet on the coyotes, guard them, back off, and let the locals hunt? Or is the hog math simply beyond any predator alive? Leave your verdict below and subscribe, because the brush has plenty it still hasn't shown us.